Hey everybody, this is Pastor Marty here at Westview Church, and we are doing our fall program here, and we're going through the 10 Commandments this fall as we kick off the season together. We're going to go ahead and start with episode 1. What is your God? You shall have no other gods before me is the first commandment, of course. We get that from Exodus as well as Deuteronomy. You shall have no other gods. That's what this episode is going to be about. That's it. Commandment number 1. And if you're anything like me, you hear that and think, well, good. Got that one. I don't worship Baal. I don't have a golden calf in my garage. I haven't sacrificed anything to Zeus lately. So we're good, right? First commandment, check. Got it. Except Martin Luther comes along and says, not so fast. Because Luther asks a much more interesting question. He asks, what does it mean to have a God? And his answer in the large catechism completely changes the commandment and changes how we understand these commandments. One of the things that Luther writes, he said, a God is that to which we look for in all good and in which we find refuge in every time of need. And then he says that to have a God is simply to trust and believe in that one with your whole heart. And then comes the line that blows the whole thing open. Trust and faith of the heart alone make both God and an idol. Oh, well, wait a minute. Because now we're not talking about statues anymore. And that's why it's an entirely different conversation. Exodus 20 begins, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Notice where this begins. It doesn't begin with, behave yourself. It begins with, I brought you out. With God, liberation comes before commandment. Grace comes before obligation. God doesn't say, keep these commandments, and maybe I'll get you out of Egypt. God says, I already got you out of Egypt. Now let me show you what freedom looks like. That's really important, especially for Christians who have spent centuries turning the 10 Commandments into God's behavior chart. Gold star if you're good, frowny face if you're bad. But that's not where this story begins. It begins with liberation. I am the God who brought you out. And then you shall have no other gods. Now, Luther comes along 1,500 years later or so and asks, okay, what's a God? And his answer isn't a supernatural being you intellectually believe exists. His answer is much more dangerous. Your God is whatever you ultimately trust. What do you expect to give you security? And where do you run when everything falls apart? What makes you feel safe? What gives you worth? What are you absolutely terrified of losing? Because whatever occupies that place in your heart, there is your God. And Luther's first big example is fantastic. Money. Of course it is. He talks about somebody who has money and possessions and therefore feels secure. This person walks around confident and fearless because they've got enough money. Luther calls this God Mammon. And suddenly, this 500-year-old catechism sounds remarkably contemporary because, let's be serious, you can confess the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed every Sunday. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, and still spend Monday through Saturday worshiping your 401k. You can say, in God we trust, and then completely lose your mind when the stock market drops 12%. So who were we trusting? That's Luther's question. And money is only the beginning, because once you understand what Luther is saying, gods are everywhere. Your career can become your God. Your reputation can become your God. Your marriage, your children, your health, your youth, your sexuality, your intelligence, your theology can become your God. Your church, your pastor, your political party, your country, your race, your guns, your house, even your lawn. Anything can become a god, even something genuinely good. That's what makes idolatry so difficult to recognize. Most idols don't walk into your life looking evil. They look wonderful. Family is wonderful. Country can be wonderful. Church can be wonderful. Money is useful. Work can be meaningful. But the question isn't, is this thing good? The question is, am I asking this thing to save me or comfort me ultimately? Because the minute I ask something finite to provide an ultimate security, I've turned it into a god. And eventually, every one of those gods will fail. Your body gets old. Your children leave. Your career ends. The money can disappear. Your political candidate loses. Your church closes. People stop applauding. Someone you love dies. And suddenly, you discover what you've actually been trusting. Jesus says something remarkably similar in Matthew 6. He says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. A few verses later, no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and wealth. Jesus is not saying that money is intrinsically evil. It's Jesus asking, who's the master? Who's serving whom? And I think that's where the first commandment becomes incredibly uncomfortable for contemporary American Christianity. Because a lot of times American Christians have gotten very good at identifying everybody else's idols. But we're considerably less interested in identifying our own. We can point at another religion. We can point at another sexuality or another political movement. We can point at another culture or another generation and say, there's the problem. Meanwhile, we're wrapping a cross in an American flag and asking political power to save Christianity. Luther would know exactly what to call that. Idolatry. Because again, who are you trusting? What are you trusting? But here's where this gets really Lutheran. If the first commandment means trust God with your whole heart, who's keeping it? Seriously. Who? Because I don't. You don't. Nobody does. Seriously, I trust God, and then I get scared. I trust God, and then the bank account gets low. Or I trust God, and then somebody doesn't like me. I trust God, and then my body does something weird. I trust God, and then somebody I love is in trouble. And suddenly I'm scrambling around, trying to save myself. That's why the first commandment is not the easiest commandment. It may be the impossible commandment, because you can't avoid murdering someone, although we're going to get deep into that too. You can refrain from stealing. You can be faithful to your spouse today. You can watch what you say about your neighbor. Those are difficult enough. But trust God completely with your whole heart? Fear nothing else? Need nothing else to justify your existence? Good luck. And that's exactly where the law does its work. Paul writes in Romans, through the law comes the knowledge of sin. The law isn't merely a list telling me how bad everybody else is or I am. The law holds up a mirror, and suddenly I see myself. I see all the little gods I've accumulated. Some of them I didn't even know were gods. And this is where Lutheran theology refuses to leave us with that old adage of try harder. Because if the solution to idolatry were simply trying harder to not have idols, we'd just turn our ability to keep the first commandment into another idol. Look how faithful I am. Or look how pure my theology is. Or look how correctly I believe. Congratulations, you built another golden calf. And this is where the gospel finally has something to say. Because Christianity is not ultimately the story of humanity successfully finding its way to God. It's the story of God coming after humanity. Paul says in Romans 5, God proves God's love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we were still sinners. Not after we fixed our idols, not after we achieved perfect faith, not after we finally trusted correctly, while we were still scrambling around looking for something else to save us, Christ came for us. That's grace. And that's why Luther's first commandment isn't ultimately an invitation to become more religious. It's an invitation to become more honest. What do you trust? What are you afraid of losing? What do you believe makes you valuable? What do you believe will finally make you safe? Where do you run when everything falls apart? Don't give the Sunday school answer. Pay attention to your life, because your answer will probably show you your gods. I know mine does. And here's the strange good news. God already knows. God knows every ridiculous little altar we've constructed. God knows every false promise we've believed. God knows every place we've tried to find security. And God keeps coming after us anyway. Maybe that's why the first commandment begins where it does. Not, you better get this right, but I am the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery. Before Israel does anything, God liberates. Before Israel believes correctly, God liberates. Before Israel keeps a single commandment, God liberates. And maybe that's the whole thing. The commandment exposes the gods that enslave us, and the gospel announces the God who keeps setting us free. You shall have no other gods. Not because God needs another fan, but because all those other gods, money, power, success, nation, reputation, religion, even ourselves, eventually demand everything from us, and they cannot give us life. But the God revealed in Jesus Christ does something completely different. This God gives God's own self away for you, for me, for a whole world full of idolaters. And that is a God worth trusting, even when we're still learning how. Thanks for being here today for the podcast on the first commandment. Thanks for joining us here at the Westview Podcast. We'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.